Greetings, Ranger fans. Jake here for another deeper run-through live as we continue our unscripted reviews of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury. Today we are continuing with episodes 7 and 8, Operation Seasoning and Changing Sides. I hope you are all doing well. I hope you've all had a great week. And I hope that you have all enjoyed from almost 2 weeks ago the recent release of Power Reviews episode 98. Welcome to those of you in the chat. Happy Friday. Hey, hey. I hope you're doing well, both Sean and Lex, as well as everyone else who is joining us tonight. No particular big news going on this week that is immediately coming to mind. But obviously, we're kind of now in that beginning of the long lull before we hopefully have Power Rangers return to us someday. And then next week we have the final deeper run through. It's hard to believe we've moved through this so quickly. We only have 1 week left to go after this, where we'll be looking at the finale, the final 2 episodes of Cosmic Fury. And after that, we'll be seeing the return of DRPR commentaries. Database Ranger Power Reviews commentaries will be returning in just another 2 weeks as we continue our countdown to the end of my series, which is very exciting. Progress on 99 is going somewhat slow at the moment, but I'm keeping at it, and I'm hopeful that I'll be making more progress soon. Have I seen the Rail Riders fan film? I have not. I know there are several fan films out there that I have not seen. I really should find time to seek them out. But first and foremost, let's take a look at what we're doing over today. And before we do, let's not forget our 3 equally non-controversial phrases. So, number 1, say with me, chat, Black Lives Matter. Number 2, say with me, chat, fascism is bad. And number 3, say with me, chat, superheroes are fun. We actually are going to have yet another new one this week as we take a look at our deeper run through of episode 7 of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, Operation Seasoning. And small spoiler in the image for those of you who had not been following along, this is the premiere of Heckle's Dark Ranger form in series. Obviously, he had previous appearances in the comics, both as a background character in Shattered Grid and then as a main character in Beyond the Grid that presented his whole big arc and backstory of how he went from being a guardian of Sentai 6 into a full-fledged Power Ranger himself through the sacrifice of Zenowing. So this, I believe that was back in issue 35 or 36 of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comics, right in the middle of Beyond the Grid. So it is wild to see Heckle's Ranger form here in this episode. And before I continue further, let's actually take a look at the recap we got from Netflix. To save Pine Ridge, Team Cosmic Fury must dismantle the system of squidrills, creating an anti-Zord force field around Earth, with the help of a spy. With that spy, obviously being Heckle. Now, this is, I would say, our transition into the 3rd act of Cosmic Fury. If Power Rangers Cosmic Fury could be said to be structured with 3 acts, this would be the beginning of the 3rd act, the big final push. The 1st act was really the setup, leading to the introduction of the powers as that culmination at the end of episode 3. And then Act 2 was really them sort of marshaling their forces together, preparing for their big return, culminating in the escape from Eridus, and then kicking things off with our big turning point in the war against evil here with Operation Seasoning. Which I will admit is a little bit of a silly name. They kind of push it a little bit with the salt and pepper shakers to represent the 2 Megazords, but I'll roll with it. Um, this one is an episode that I think um, really kind of highlights to a degree um, the kind of rushed pacing of Cosmic Fury. There's a lot happening in this series, and it's clear that it was initially conceptualized as a full season, even if it might not have been fully fleshed out and written as a full 20 episode season. It does feel like there's just a full season's worth of story here. And this is a really big one where we get the reveal that Heckle is a ranger, the failure of his attempt to take down the Squidroll, and the Rangers being captured, and then the reveal of Zato's struggles with the Morphin Master magic, and ultimately the big battle at the end and the capturing of Squillia. There's just a lot that happens in this episode, um, and it goes along at a good clip, but there's just so little time to breathe and soak in some of these reveals. We do get some time with Zato, which is obviously the primary character um, focus of this episode, with the reveal that Zato is struggling and may not actually have much time left, and that his revival at the end of Dino Fury may have been one that is only on borrowed time, especially with the Morphin Masters having been captured. Um, and this sort of reintroduces the urgency of saving the Morphin Masters, even if that has never really been a primary focus of the Rangers' mission. Their mission is a little bit scattered. We don't have that united mission of trying to find Zordon like we had in Power Rangers in Space. We have we got to get back to Earth and save Earth, but we also need to save Ollie, who's kind of evil, and then we also had to find Zato, who had gone missing, and then we also have to get back the Morphin Masters. But with that being almost like a tertiary goal compared to everything else. And I like Scott's note how, yes, Heckle did appear in the promo for Cosmic Fury, and between him and Billy, we almost have a Blue Ranger by committee with the absence of Ollie. And this is actually an interesting note that this is the first episode to not feature Ollie at all. First episode between Dino Fury and Cosmic Fury, I believe. So, considering that we also had Zato missing for a little bit, and all the other Rangers were kind of late entries onto the team, this is actually the first this actually establishes Amelia as the only cast member to actually be in every episode of both Dino Fury and Cosmic Fury. So kudos to Amelia for managing to be the one character in every single episode. We not even Tarek as Void Knight, with being the primary villain of Dino Fury, managed to maintain that. Although obviously he traded spots a few times. And this is a good focus episode for Tarek as well, who also gets quite a bit of the spotlight here. So we do have, again, a lot going on between Heckle getting some spotlight. We get Tarek having some spotlight. We have the main character drama of Zato and Ion and Solon, and that team having their struggles. And so a few things almost seem like they go by like that. The fact that like 6 Rangers, six. Actually, I have to double check. We lose because there's Amelia, Javi, Izzy, Fern, Billy, and then Heckle. All get captured, while Zato and Ion are the only ones who escape. And there's just so little time actually given to that. The fact that all these Rangers did get captured Um, the scene just goes by so quickly as they're just quickly snatched up, brought to the prison, and we don't get to see any of their experience trapped in that prison. Um, and that's one of um, those other aspects of the sort of rush pacing that I was talking about. And it's not one of those things where the episode feels like it suffers so much as you can feel that there were so many more stories that we could have seen here, that would have just been so cool to get that extra depth and that extra insight into all these different aspects. Um, the Zed re-education camps are just a hilarious little side gag that you kind of wish you could have had, a "What's it like on the inside" episode. Um, really, Cosmic Fury does a great job, an excellent job, of just bringing to mind so many different fan fiction opportunities. Because it's like, oh, I want to see what these characters were doing in this moment. What were these characters doing in that moment? There's so many off-screen adventures. Not to mention all the different Ranger teams that have ostensibly been captured as a result of the anti-Zord field that Squid Ink Inc. Presents. Um, and I love the kind of literal interpretation of a re-education camp where it's Zed decided to reverse the alphabet so everyone has to learn their ZYXs, and that's just a good joke. I like all these little things that are going on here, and so wish that we could spend a little bit more time with them. But the plot presses ever onwards. We have um, we have Zato rescuing the Zords using his Morphin Master magic, that knocking him out again after he'd already been knocked out um, from just using magic once to find Solon the previous episode. Although, interestingly, it seems as though the magic to find Solon may have actually been a bigger drain to him almost than um, the magic to rescue the Zords or the magic that he uses in the big distraction plan to make Solon giant, which is, again, also super fun. So many little super fun things happening here. Um, but it is interesting how they are trying to play up um, the rapid decay of Zato's life force, so to speak. Um, but due to the pacing of the plot, he actually has less and less recovery time each time. So it almost seems like he's getting better at this. Um, but it also, unfortunately, means that we have that issue that I had mentioned the other day, where we have this character called the Zenith Ranger, who sadly never really seems to get a chance to demonstrate his abilities in battle. Zato is still a ranger ostensibly, but he's actually no longer a combat character, which is just very unusual, especially for a sixth ranger or a superpowered ranger. He is arguably the mage of the group if we were looking at this in D&D terms, which is something that we've never had from Power Rangers before. Um, much like we haven't had much in terms of we haven't really had a disabled ranger before until now. Javi um, became became an amputee with the loss of his arm, um, which also gets some acknowledgement this episode with his parents expressing concern over what happened to his arm and him not having time to explain. Which again feels like another opportunity for a story that we would love to see. Um, and I think that might be one of my favorite things going on with Cosmic Fury is that it's skewing very close to its core story while still creating all of these little ideas that can spin off in the audience's mind of, oh, well, what's going on here? What's going on there? What's going on here? What's going on? Ooh, what would this conversation look like? What would that conversation look like? And that's something I feel like Power Rangers doesn't always do enough of. Um, Sometimes their stories will, feel very self-contained and feel like they're all wrapped up by the end, and you don't feel like there's all this other stuff going on the sidelines that you could be exploring in supplementary materials and in fan created materials. Um, and yeah, it would be cool to have the teams with more with these kind of very specific roles that they can play when engaging in either combat or on missions. Um, we're already seeing that some of the characters have fallen into slightly different roles that kind of reinforce um, their value to the team. Like Ion being the ship, the cook on the ship, and Amelia also being rising up to leader as uh, Zato transitions into like the mage, and we have Izzy is the fast fighter, and you get things like that. Whereas now Javi is the not necessarily as agile, but now much stronger fighter due to his arm. So everyone is having their own little, um, you know, roles that they're playing, and we get like the meat. We get to see a little bit more from Fern's weapon that we just briefly saw in the previous episode. That is a little bit more versatile than we thought it was. Now having that chain element. But yeah, he's a support mage now, and he is, yes, in Billy's position in Zeo, um, except he's more so, except he's still ostensibly a ranger who sometimes participates a little bit in combat and still pilots a Zord. The Zord piloting role is pretty much the most rangerly thing that Zato seems to really get to do, is that he gets to pilot his Dragon Zord. Although, these Zords don't really have distinct individual pilots. Um, Although I do like that with regards to the two different Megazords in this episode, we do have him and Ion. Once again, the two Ravkonian bros piloting that one Megazord together, and that does set things up for this to be a little bit more of a them episode. Um, and as I'm talking about, all these different roles that they could take in different missions on, like, Dungeons and Dragons terms, kind of little quests, if you will. Right from the beginning is another setup for so many other stories that the writers would have explored if they had a full season. Because the journey from Eridus to Earth happens entirely off screen. And you can just imagine all the different adventures that they could have had on their journey to Earth as well. Here it gets shortened to only being ostensibly 14 hours. Although it's a little unclear from the dialogue if that was the full length of the journey to Earth or just the amount of time it took for Solon to clean Scuttleworm goo out of her circuitry. But I get the impression that the idea was that he was asleep for 14 hours. But that's simultaneously, I feel like, the biggest strength and, to an extent, the biggest weakness of this episode is that you can feel all the opportunities and all the different things you want to be seeing, but you don't actually get a chance to see it, and that's a shame. That is unfortunate. I feel like they did choose the right stories to tell here that they needed to tell. Um, it's just such a shame that we couldn't see those other stories happening as well. And you can't help but wonder, well, how could they have handled that? And one thing that I really wish that this show did, just um, from a little fan service perspective, is we know there's ostensibly all these Rangers captured all over Earth, but we never get to see them. But we know that that the New Zealand studios have had, in the past at least, all these different ranger costumes that they used in the legendary battle, I would have loved to see just little quick scenes of all these different ranger costumes just fighting sentinels just at different locations. Just a very quick little, like, maybe it shows up on, like, a view screen, something like that, um, just to help this feel a little bit more connected to that broader world that they keep hinting at. Um, we also, we don't get any explanation for how Heckle became the spy. It's great to have Heckle back. It's great to have him in this new role and that they hint at his story from the comics, but there's also just enough difference that we don't know if the comic story is his actual story, and you can't help but wonder what his actual story is. He doesn't morph the same way, for instance. He doesn't have a Dino Charge morpher the the usual Dino Charge Rangers. He instead has his like Spinosaurus boomerang blade, um, which is a cool morphing device, but also not the one that had been established from the comics. So that draws into question: okay, how much of the comic origin is his actual origin here? Um, and did the writers actually take the comic story into account, or did they just take for granted that somewhere he has a backstory and they don't need to account for that? And I feel like it might be leaning a little bit more towards the latter based off that different morphing process, as well as various statements I believe Simon Bennett made about how they let the comics be their own thing and don't really look to them for the most part unless there's some sort of like specific uh, cross reference, like with the transportal devices in Dimensions in Danger, which I believe um, that was sort of Melissa Flores kind of championing, hey, we're going to reference this in the comics and let's reference this in the show. And I don't know that there's still somebody who really serves that role of bouncing back and forth between the different Power Rangers media. Uh, I'm unclear on who may be serving that role in terms of overall brand supervision. Since we no longer have Brian Castantini and we no longer have um, Melissa Flores, and I believe Paul Strickland um, may be working with a different aspect of Hasbro at this point. And it's been so many changes over the years. I've lost track, to be perfectly honest. And yes, Hulk Egypt, you are correct. His helmet is also slightly different than it was in the comics, because they're using the Kiryu Navy helmet, I believe, which is from the Kyoryuger special 100 years after, if I recall correctly. Um, so these were like descendants of the Kyoryugers, and um, so it's a repainted helmet, and so they didn't repaint it back into Death Ryuger, which was the original name of the Dark Rangers form in Kyoryuger. So we get this sort of hybrid version of the Dark Ranger, um, who ostensibly likely has a similar backstory to the comic version of Heckle, but we don't really know. Um, and that's a little bit of a shame because I do think that Beyond the Grid could have explained away how Heckle is in this dimension. Because that's something that we don't get into, why Heckle is in the main timeline, whereas he's usually would otherwise be in the Dino Charge universe, or even in a completely separate timeline, possibly at this point, since he went back in time 65 million years to um, save Sentai 6, and that would have created an entirely separate splintered timeline. So I have no idea if the Heckle, which Heckle in which universe is from which timeline, um, because we get the impression at this point that there's been multiple timelines, um, with Keeper and his time travel nonsense, plus the timelines of the comics adding into things. Um, but if they had maintained the comics timeline and he had been a part of the Beyond the Grid storyline, then he could have been with the rest of the team when they um, escaped from the void that they were in for during the Beyond the Grid story, and that could have folded him into the main timeline. Um, Especially since he was with other Rangers from later on in the timeline than the core Mighty Morphin team. I feel like that would have been an opportunity to sort of explain away what he's doing here. But that's getting really deep cut, really nitpicky, and the writers have so much to be doing here that it wouldn't have really made sense for them to try and dive into that. And yes, to paraphrase the landlord, in the vast reaches of the multiverse, it's all possible. Um, and yes, they do have a lot of reasons to ignore the comics because they really, the comics are a heavy Mighty Morphin emphasis, and the comics have taken a lot of liberties with things as they've progressed. Um, Especially everything surrounding Dark Spectre has gotten quite confusing, actually, considering the Heir to Darkness storyline seemed to show him already free, and now we're having Darkest Hour, which appears to be the process of him getting free, and it's very unclear how that all works. Some versions are showing him as a lava demon every time that you see him. Other versions are showing him as possessing different forms. Um, and I need to get caught up on the comics to see if that's actually um, resolved in any meaningful way, because that's all unclear to me at this point. And things um, like Divatox being a contemporary of Astronema as a teenager being implied in the comics as well wouldn't make any sense due to Divatox explicitly being hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. Can the Mighty Morphin comics progress to Zeo already? Well, I mean, they're going through a lot of interesting storylines, and they are touching on a lot of different elements of the universe. So, you know what? They can take their time. They haven't even gotten to Rita and Zed getting married yet. They've been going for a couple years. They have had some Zeo stories here and there. Um, but I'm sure they'll get there eventually. I'm fine with them taking their time. Hey, Athena, good to see you. And yes, I will agree that this is still less confusing than the Transformers continuity. Um, so other things that I enjoyed about this episode are all the nods that they do have to past characters and the return of several past characters. Not just Heckle and Tarek, but we get to see we get to see we have Pop Pop referencing Grid Battle Force and General Shaw. We have the return of the Garcias, along with Lily, who I don't think anybody expected to ever see again, who's hanging out with her Uncle Carlos. Um, just that I thought was a really nice little nod to a side character from a very early episode of Dino Fury, and I was thrilled to see her again. And that extra um, disability representation, um, which is just really cool to me. Just like the Zeo suits more. The Zeo suits were cool suits. I'm not going to disagree on that. But the use of the Grid Battle Force teleporters, I thought, was just something that really speaks to how much the writers are familiar with the universe in which they are working with. Those teleporters were a major part of of Beast Morphers. I nearly said Grid Defense. I still have my own bias. They were, a really integral part of the first season of Beast Morphers when it came to, initially banishing Evox to the cyber dimension, and then later with the with the tower heist where we stole the Morphex towers, or the Morphex tower. And seeing those get used again was just such a great throwback and such a great use of continuity for people who have been paying attention, and a very clever plan as well. The idea of using teleportation offensively is something that I feel that Cosmic Fury, or well, Dino Fury made a lot of good use of. Not always quite directly in an offensive manner, but very creatively. You see these, monsters will teleport away, but then teleport right back just closer to you, instead of chasing after you. Or when they teleported up above the Nemesis beast and then use that to do an aerial attack. And here we get to actually use teleporters to steal a base and then drop it on another base. And I thought that that was just a very clever use of pre-existing technology. The use of the sleepy cuffs, which, again, not something you thought you'd see again, but had already been established as part of Void Knight's arsenal, so it makes sense that Tarek would have more sleepy cuffs. The existence of sleepy cuffs in general was always weird. It would have been nice if they had some sort of origin, considering how frequently they got used during Season 1 of Dino Fury, between during their initial introduction episode with Riul, and then their reuse in the Season 1 finale with Void Trap. But I felt like at this point they'd been established well enough that they were well used. And that's one of the fun things with Power Rangers. Once something's been established, no matter how silly or out of place it may seem in its initial introduction, it's there now, and it exists, and you can call back to it. So you can have things like the Halloween Intergalactic Court making a reappearance because we know that it exists already because it made an appearance once. And we've made plenty of fun of that in our live reactions when that appeared. So overall, this episode, as I'm talking about it, I'm really having a lot of fun talking about all the different little ways in which the writers really had fun themselves, referencing past parts of the world, hinting at other stories, referencing past characters, bringing back past characters, and then having this big, 7 Ranger fight where we have 5 Cosmic Fury Rangers plus Heckle and Billy, and honestly, but honestly, because everything happened so fast, I even had to rewind a few things, because I'll admit the first time I think I watched this episode, I was kind of surprised when Billy came out of the base, because everything went so quickly, or when Billy came out of the prison, because everything went so quickly that I didn't notice that he was in the cockpit of one of the Cosmic Fury Zords, and I didn't see him get captured with the others, because they had like a wide shot where you could kind of see them all lying down, and then they zoomed in for a closer shot when the Sentinels grabbed them away, and Billy was only visible in that wide shot. So I'm like, wait, did they capture Billy? Is Billy back in the base? Because Billy spends most of his time on the base. Oh no, he did get captured. Okay. So things like that kind of speak again to how quickly everything is moving. And throughout all those fun little moments, we do still have that strong heart of Zato's character development here. And it's one that I feel like the show's not fully going to go into, because the writers probably feel like they can't really go into it, both due to time and due to just the level of maturity of the underlying character drama here. But Zato has kind of a death wish, and I've talked about that before, and it's really ramping up at this point. he is going hard on the heroic sacrifice, um, every chance he gets. And I've spoken before about how I get the impression that Zato has a sense of survivor's guilt from 65 million years ago, and honestly, I think that he doesn't believe he deserves to be back. I, like he feels like he's only back for the mission. He's only back to serve a purpose, and that's all he seems to care about. There's some deep psychological drama going on with Zato that I feel like the show can't address, but is just so fascinating. Zato is Zato's a fantastic character. It's a shame that the arc that he has this season, by necessity, takes him out of the action, um, and has left him out so often of the stories. But it's an excellent story for him, and it feels like a natural evolution of the character in so many respects. Um, like he's someone who had let go of life when he made that sacrifice at the end of Dino Fury, and he still seems to feel very disconnected. Um, like it's you know again it's too mature to really go over in a kids show, um, and you really want for him to have a have that stronger sense of life, but at the same time he is someone who has been around for 65 million years, and he's seen so much and he's been through so much, um, and it just creates such conflicting feelings as you're watching it. And it's so heartbreaking for his friends, for Ion and Solon, to to watch him go down this self-destructive path and feel like they can't stop him, and having to weigh the difference between their love for him and and letting him make his own choices. It you know it's like I've never experienced this, but I imagine it's something like seeing a loved one in hospice care. He's on borrowed time. He knows that his time is coming to an end. Um, and so I don't. I know that there's the self-destructive side of it, but it genuinely feels more like someone coming to terms with a terminal illness and choosing not to engage in whatever may prolong their length of life, but may compromise their quality of life. Things that you don't expect to see from Power Rangers. Something you don't expect to really explore with a superhero. Um, and I can't even wrap my head around what it would be like to really reckon with the implications of Zato's story here. But I feel like that's the closest thing I could really think of. I recently watched watched the series, the Midnight Club, which is about a group of teenagers with terminal illnesses who get together and tell ghost stories. And it's one of those Mike Flanagan shows on Netflix. He does very good horror series, and this was a very emotional series because obviously all these terminally ill teenager characters, um, and it feels a lot like that in those respects. Not necessarily um, an active wish to end one's life, but instead a peace with the knowledge that one's life is coming to an end and wishing to make the best use of the life they have left. And that seems to be where Zato is at. Even though it means that his life may not be much longer, he knows that he already has limited time. I don't think that he seriously believes that the Morphin Masters are going to be able to save him. And instead, he's just choosing to make the best use of his time instead of making the most time. And that's such a difficult choice. And it's probably the deepest story of Cosmic Fury, at least so far at this stage in the story. And yeah, it is very similar to certain aspects of the Phantom Ranger, who does have the similar heroic sacrifice tendency. So I as someone who's obviously spent a lot of time working with the character of the Phantom Ranger, this is again fascinating to me. Although the Phantom Ranger is one who operates a little differently, and in terms of how things may resolve with that character in the final 2 episodes of Power Reviews, you'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that you know that tendency towards self-sacrifice is something that is a very strong tendency with some Rangers, and Zato might be the strongest that I've seen out of the series, with the Phantom Ranger being up there alongside like Kendrix or Alex or any other Ranger that has actually sacrificed themselves at one point or another. But one of the things that just really sells this one to even more is his extremely close relationships, which is something that the Phantom Ranger does not have, at least in the main continuity. Obviously, in Power Reviews, he has his friends that he cares deeply about, but in the main Power Ranger series, the Phantom Ranger never had any close connections and always kept himself, at an arm's length. But Zato deeply cares about his friends. He deeply cares about Ion, he deeply cares about Solon, and he cares about the rest of the Rangers. But it's not enough, and he knows that it's not really enough to keep him there with them. And he's holding so much in there. But your heart breaks just a little bit every time you hear Solon say, "My boy." She really sees Zato as her son. She's the good Dino Mom. She looked after him in that base for 65 million years, and letting go of him must have been so hard. And we never really got a chance to reckon with that. We've gotten some reckoning of that with Ion, but we never had a chance to really reckon with that for Solon. And for her to be so present for this series of sacrifices, and almost starting him down the path with him having his first spell be to find her, it's really tough and it's heartbreaking to see. So I talked about, I know I spent half an hour talking about how this episode was filled with all the little fun wacky thing. I started with all the fun goofy things and into all the fun continuity references, and now I feel like the mood just got dropped down. So that's Operation Seasoning. A little spicy, a little salty. And I think that's a good point for us to bring things over into our next episode, episode 8 of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, Changing Sides. here we have different uh, characters being brought back in the form of Slither and Mucus, who kind of left us with this little tease at the end of Dino Fury. But here, um, we get to actually follow up on that, which I appreciate. It does feel like the writers are making this really good faith effort to follow up on these little perceived dangling plot threads or hints that have been sprinkled throughout Power Rangers continuity. You know, they had Evox um, actually be the evolved form of Venjix to follow up on the little tease at the end of RPM. You know, we have things like uh, Slither and Mucus coming back. We have the nods to Santora being pregnant. Um, we have uh, finally being able to see Heckle as the Dark Ranger, which was something that I think everybody felt was a missed opportunity in Dino Charge, and they really wanted to see, and so they get to finally do that thing they always wanted, bringing back Billy, which was something that people had wanted to see for so long, but had never been an opportunity. Um, you know, all these little things. Eltar actually getting to spend some time on Eltar, having Eltar be a prominent location beyond, um, you know, just the little bit at the beginning and end of Turbo. Um, so this is again the writers really trying to, I think, do honor to the history of the show and do right by all the things they probably always wanted to do or they wanted to see resolved but had not been resolved before. So let's look at our little summary here for switching. Oh, I say changing sides instead of switching sides? I have an error on my thumbnail that I am going to have to fix. Wow. Why did I write changing sides instead of switching sides? I must be tired. I am sorry about that. I will fix that in post. Not in post in terms of what's in the side of the screen, but I will fix that on the thumbnail. Switching sides. Two ex-villains should be the last people to cure Ollie, but Ion has a plan that might just work. Meanwhile, Zato's secret becomes harder to hide. So yes, Zato continues his path of self-destruction here, or self-sacrifice, or his process of letting go, his ranger hospice, whatever it is that you want to call it, that continues with Zato here in this episode. This is yet another one where it feels like we've got like several episodes mashed together to a degree, because this episode has the somewhat common trope that Cosmic Fury seems to be displaying of everything, all the battles resolve basically by the end of Act 2, and then there's a whole third act of other things setting up other pieces of story. So we have, you know, the big fight. We have the Zord fight against the copy guards. We have the big fight with Bajilia and Squillia. And then after that's resolved, then we execute the whole plot with Mucus and Slither, which feels like it could be a whole episode unto itself, you know, where we see how things could go right, could go wrong, before ultimately everything falls apart. Yeah, the grasp on Ollie loosening, Mucus and Slither, whatever else. So here we have Ollie back. We're teasing more with Zed's plan with the Morphin Masters, which got teased at the end of Takeoff, which, as I said, was sort of the end of Act 2. So that was, I think, sort of the tease of the end game that we'll be seeing in the upcoming episodes, with the Master Captivator and what he'll be doing with that Morphin Master energy, and what it is that Scrozzle's come up with. But this is also an episode where it feels like our new villain characters are once again a little bit undermined. Um, there's this thing where Zed keeps being pushed as being the one in charge, pushed as being the one behind everything, um, to the extent that by the end of the episode, Bajilia and Squillia are referenced as uh, Zed's henchmen, and referring to them as Zed's henchmen just doesn't feel right when you know that Squid Ink Inc. is the driving force of all of these invasions. All of the technology is from them. They're the ones who chose to unleash Zed, and he didn't really do anything that gave them any power they didn't already have. The one thing that he did was he did destroy Dino Henge, which obviously was a big key to this. But the Anti-Zords force fields, that was them. The Squidrills is them. The Sentinels, that's them. The prisons, the force fields, they're the ones who really do everything. They just do it all in Zed's name. And it feels almost like they are engaged in like this pseudo propaganda campaign to absolve themselves of responsibility, which is a very corporate thing to do. So I'll give them that. All right, have a good night, Lex. That's something that I find interesting in the villain dynamics of this series. Along with just it's fun that we get to see Campbell Cooley pulling double duty in this episode, being both Slither and Scrozzle, which we don't get to see much of. And he really gets to have fun as Dr. Sly, as well as being Slither and Scrozzle. As well as Torm Heng, I believe I hope I pronounced her name correctly. Once again, being adorable as human mucus, and creating some other interesting parallels. In this case, the no one should be forced to live in the wrong body bit from Zato, which obviously has some trans rights parallels. So I know there were plenty of memes of Zato says trans rights. Good job there, team. Which I think also goes in line with the show's well-deserved GLAAD award for the LGBTQ representation that we've gotten in these recent seasons, specifically with Izzy and Vern, but also little nods here and there as well. With this being the closest thing that we've had to a trans allegory so far that seems intentional. Even though it's very loose, obviously, because this is really more of a mucus trying to return to an original form rather than transitioning from an initially presented form to a different one. So it's really the rhetoric more so than the story that aligns with trans rights. But I still respect that nice nod of solidarity. And that Zato deems this a worthy cause to sacrifice some of his life force for. Although, again, we are seeing him really putting others ahead of himself. Like, for so many of the things that he's doing here, I don't feel as though the story fully justifies the need for him to do many of these actions. Him finding Solon, obviously emotionally he had to find Solon, but realistically, they probably could have tracked her through other means. The rescuing of the Zords is great, but they didn't necessarily need the Zords for the rest of that episode, for the most part. technically they did have them fight Mega Squidrill and a copy guard, but for the actual main plot, not entirely needed. Could they have found a different distraction than making a giant and so on? Sure, probably wouldn't have been as fun, but sure. Um, and then, you know, Mucus getting turned back into her original self is also one of those things where it's like, okay, he's really coming at this more from an emotional standpoint than a whatever means necessary standpoint. Um, this is out of sympathy more so than out of necessity. Um, they probably could have found some other way to cure mucus, um, or they could have probably still pulled off the plan without mucus in some way, or had her fulfill some other role. But that it was really came down to Zato having this sense of right and wrong and wanting to right things and choosing how he's using his remaining time. And there's that emphasis on it's his choice for how he is going to deal with what is functionally a terminal illness, even if it's, a magic one. And so when I was first watching these episodes, I almost got a little angry at Zato for like throwing his life away, is what it felt like. But as I talk it through, I gain more sympathy and I gain more recognition for what he's going for what he's going through. Now that I'm kind of reframing it through that other perspective, I think that deepens the story a little bit and adds that extra layer of relatability to the character. Not necessarily in terms of relatability in that, I would make those same choices necessarily, but more along the lines of, okay, but I can respect those character choices, which is a little different. So again, we're continuing that arc with Zato, and leading into the reveal by the end of him coming clean to the rest of the team. But as I was saying, all of that is still stuff that happens after the fact, for the most part. Zato coming clean to the team, the big mission with Slither and Mucus, that's after we have the whole big showdown with Bejilia and Squillia, after Squillia being captured at the end of the last episode. Interesting. You have thoughts on the Morphin Masters? That the landlord influenced Master Green with the legendary battle. Yes and no. I'll put it that way from my perspective, having as the DRPR thing. I'd say you're not off the mark. But I would say it was really more of he set up circumstances for her to interfere, more so than necessarily actually literally getting into her head. So but I like that we were on that kind of same page there when it comes to the headcanon. One thing that I do recognize is when it comes to works of art, whether we're specifically series, you're not going to be able to put everything into the show itself, and you'll have some ideas of what you feel was happening off screen, and the audience will have different ideas, and both can be valid because neither one is on screen, so anything is game. It's sort of the Schrodinger's cat. Both can be true until one actually appears on screen. So I do like some elements of the fight sequence in this episode, and then there are others that I feel a little disappointed by to a degree. Do the Morph Masters know that he survived? Um, if I've not interpreted it as such, um, that's something that I feel, um, is basically what allowed for his manipulation. We've seen they're not omniscient. So his manipulation was made possible basically by virtue of him existing in a blind spot. Um, is sort of how I lean into things. But back on Cosmic Fury. Um, we have another little opening sequence where we get into these missed opportunities. Just like before, we've jumped straight to Earth, missing all the space adventures along the way. Here, we're talking about all the different battles that we missed off screen. Saving Japan, seeing Dr. Akana, saving New Zealand from being New Zedland, which is again quality joke. The pun game is strong here, and I like it. Um, but those are again different things that you could have seen with a full season, and it's a shame that you don't get to. Um, and we do touch on, okay, we're on the next, and then we also have that other issue that I mentioned before, where it feels like there's not a singular through line, but almost a checklist of missions, and that weakens the cohesion a little bit of the story. So it's like, okay, we rescued Earth. Now we gotta rescue Ollie, and now we gotta go and then we gotta go deal with the saving the Morphin Masters. Because we have an idea for how to rescue Ollie, and the Morphin Masters thing we'll figure out later. Even though the Morphin Masters seem like they are almost more pressing than Ollie, simply because they are potentially the key to saving Zato, and that's something that I feel doesn't get quite enough acknowledgement in these two episodes, where it really could have given a little bit of a kickstart into the end game of the series, like, hey, Zed's doing something with the Morphin Masters, and also we really have a strong impetus to save them because they're the only way to save Zato. I feel like that's just one of those misapplications of focus that could have given us a little bit of a stronger driving through line. But there's so many different things happening that having that strong driving through line is understandably difficult to achieve. And I appreciate the writers instead spending a little bit more time on the things that they enjoy and have fun with, like the story of Slither and Mucus here, or the introduction of Heckle in the previous episode, and or having fun with Solon. Clearly demonstrating a strong love for the characters that they have created and built up over the course of these few seasons. They having I didn't even mention Tarek having his crazy unmorph battle with Umwizo in the previous episode, which really feels like something that that almost belonged to him as Void Knight, but you just kind of roll with. That this civilian with 2 Ravkonian swords is just as good as a ranger when it comes to fighting monsters. You just kind of have to roll with that, because that the writers are just trying to give love to their characters as they say farewell to all of them, what could be for the last time. And you do feel that love for Slither and Mucus, as well as for the actors. Campbell Cooley has been voicing Power Rangers characters since Tomars with SPD. And so for him to be able to have the spotlight here is great, just like we get to have Kelson Henderson back as Mick for the first few episodes. Or Heckle, or Ryan Carter back as Heckle for that middle string of episodes. There's really an impressive balancing act of returning guest characters across the course of this series. They do keep bouncing around. Who's the recurring character for this arc? Who's the returning character for that arc? Whose face do we get to see now? Although it would have been nice, again, to have been able to see, even if it's on a view screen, the other Rangers being a part of this fight for Earth. It was one of the great moments of Countdown to Destruction that we got to see these bits of fighting on these other planets, where we could see the alien Rangers, we could see Trey of Triforia, we saw the Phantom Ranger and Blue Centurion all fighting, classic villains on different planets. And that's the one element that I feel is missing from this big Liberation of Earth pair of episodes. It feels a little too insular, with only following the characters that we actually get to spend time with, and not getting to see those little nods to the other characters that are only verbally acknowledged but not visually acknowledged. It's a little bit of, I wish there was a little bit more show don't tell going on with the other Rangers fighting in other places. Obviously, time is a limitation, budget's a limitation, but it is one of those things that the show has pulled off in the past, and I wish they could have pulled it off here, because I think that would have been really cool. Just little legendary battle nuggets that have a little bit more emotional weight because you have this stronger story surrounding it. And that's something. And yeah, Lumina, you're pointing out that they apparently wanted to have the Void Knight armor back, but Toei, they weren't able to get it back from Toei, which is fair. You work with what you can. I believe there were plenty of. I'm sure there were plenty of other characters they would have loved to bring back for this whole season. And you just work with what you have. Excuse me. A little tired. Long week. So my brain just kind of flew away for a moment there. So that's one of those, where we're not getting quite enough of the show don't tell element. We do continue to get good jokes with Squilia and her brainlessness in this episode. Just that little dig at influencers. We get good acknowledgement of Ravkonian mind reading and demonstration that it has its limits and it has its drawbacks, as you will be forced to look at fish with feet. So again, the comedy has been quite strong in this season, which I appreciate. That is something that has always been a part of Power Rangers, and even though we have had some darker, more serious seasons, they really are, I think, enhanced by the levity, and I'm always here for a good little pun, which I think is just something that's baked into Power Rangers dialogue and kind of always needs to be there. When we get a little too self-serious, we lose out on that. As much as I do also love the occasional dramatic monologue or dramatic moment. Everything in Power Rangers in space, and the Countdown to Destruction, especially when you have Ecliptor or Morning Astronema, those moments are fantastic. And we're getting some of that too. We're getting a nice balance here as we're dealing with, the heartbreak of a friend who has, basically an expiration date that nobody knows for certain, combined with these wacky characters coming back in, switching sides, which is the actual name of this episode. And that whole progression, that whole balance. And we also get some really strong girl power moments in this episode, which I appreciate. I'm not always, so a lot of times it'll feel like pandering, but in this case, it didn't feel like that was a strong focus. It was just something we were getting to see, The two original villains this season, Bajilia and Squilia, are both female villains, and we get to see them in some strong combat for the first time. And Squilia had some decent fights with Heckle in the previous episode, but here both of them together for the first time. And we get the first ever 3-girl Megazord. We've never had an all-female piloted Megazord where we had we've never had 3 female Rangers at once before. Let alone them all piloting a Megazord all by themselves. And that's just kind of great. The guys hang back and need their help. And then we get that big Here Comes the Cavalry when the 3 girls come in and just wail on our 2 villainesses. That really showing off the new weapons. They definitely seem to love these new weapon designs that they came up with for this season. They really have been giving us a lot with the individualized weapons after Dino Fury was really mostly limited to the Chroma Fury sabers and just whatever sleeve they happen to have, but not really so much in terms of individualized weapons. Here we get a lot more with the individualized weapons that they've been given, and they're clearly having fun with those, and those weapons are also just a gorgeous design. But we get just boom, 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 boom as they just wail on these villainesses. But unfortunately, that final hammer blow just feels like a little bit of an anticlimactic finisher. And I think it's because a hammer does not effectively hit 2 people at once. It just doesn't. If it was like, one of those big energy sweeps shockwave kind of things, I think that would have worked a little better. But it was too close, and it just felt like it was landing kind of a glancing blow on 2 of them at the same time, and then there was just this kind of boom, and then they're gone. We're just getting a little bit of an anticlimactic finisher to these 2 villains. Although we can see by the end, Bajilia still has the 1 tentacle creeping away, so we got a little bit of a fake out there. But it does appear to be the genuine end of Squilia, as far as I can tell. And both of them just kind of, went out quite quickly at the end of that fight, and without having a chance to really develop much depth. Squilia was for the most part just kind of a running gag of a character. She had her little thing with Heckle, which was nice. I'm not sure that she really needed more. But it still, I think it was still a little bit of a surprise to see both these characters kind of get knocked out so relatively easily. Obviously it is a big Ranger finisher there with all 5 weapons, but it still felt a little anticlimactic, even if it is supposed to be a fake out. You kind of want to be faked out a little bit more than that if you can be. Bajilia is and like I said before, the fact they're both referenced as Zed's henchmen rather than villains in their own right, who have really been the driving forces of the main plot for the series, is just kind of a weird little disconnect that I'm still conflicted on. It's one of those things where you kind of need to get into the end game of the series to really determine how you feel about a villain, because you need to kind of like, okay, well, I don't know how I feel about this villain, but let's see how their ultimate plan is. And that can make or break a villain for some. A lot of people kind of, I think, came around on Lothor in Ninja Storm when he revealed that he actually did have a long game the whole time. But even if they do have a long game, you still want to, have a strong sense of the character prior to that. And Bajillion and Squillia do have some pretty clear character traits, with Squillia being, the social media influencer, Bajilia being the corrupt corporate executive. Um, but both of those feel like they're a little bit one note. And they're good gags, but they're not particularly deep as villains. They don't necessarily need to be, but considering that they are the two original villains for this series, and they are the ones who are driving the main thrust of the story, more so than Zed, who is given all the gravitas. Um, you kind of would like a little bit more from those characters, a little bit more sense of their capabilities, of their motivations, of their schemes. Very low on schemes from an episode to episode basis, even if there might be a long game scheme. You kind of want a little bit more of a sense of how they are episode to episode. Lothor didn't reveal his long game till the end, but he had a lot of fun being wacky villain up until then. You could still had enough of a sense of him that you see why he's the guy in charge. Whereas here it's a little bit more of, well, why aren't they seen as a little bit more in charge than they are? That's a little bit of a weird thing, and I'm still trying to kind of pin down my feelings on them as villains. And this, while it may technically not be the end of Bajilia, it is interesting that we do see more of the Squillia costume during that third act when Slither has taken her form, and still getting to lean into that just a little bit more, just for a little bit longer, as he and Mucus head off to Eltar, with the very silly gag of Mucus and Mushroom at Law, which, sure, why not? It's one of those things where the suggestion didn't make a whole lot of sense for Mucus to be a lawyer, but then they kind of still managed to improvise well enough to make it work with the inheritance of the bajillion-dollar corporation. So it's, again, one of those things where it's like, okay, I'll roll with this. And then we get into this, this big, final moment at Zed's palace in Eltar, where they destroy the Triceratops statue and Ollie loses his powers, and he still appears to be on Zed's side. Although, I've been, the show has kept us guessing, I think, enough times that it's hard to say for certain. Because this has been a really persistent evil turn. So, you are kind of wondering, okay, wait, is he actually now good? Is he finally good and just faking evil, or is he still evil? How does this evil spell actually function? Was Dr. Akana right or wrong? We don't really know at the end of this episode. So it is nice they managed to keep the audience guessing well enough when it comes to that. We even got to sneak in a bomb at the end of this episode. And speaking of things that I'm sure the writers obviously love, since It's a Bomb got snuck into the beginning of every episode of Power Rangers Dino Charge, as well as the end of Power Rangers Ninja Steel, or Super Ninja Steel. And is the fun of that. I imagine if they could have justified bringing back Sledge and crew, they probably would have. Although I think that that particular villain party probably ran its course. But yeah, another good solid episode. Just one that I feel is again feeling like a little bit of a mashup of what could have been multiple episodes. Um, the rediscovery of Slither and Mucus, and them all learning to trust them, and the big showdown with Bejilia and Squillia, and then the sneaky undercover mission. We've got so many sneaky undercover missions going on that could be full episodes in and of themselves, and we just don't get to see that, and that's such a shame. So I feel like that's kind of the core takeaway from these two episodes, is that we are looking at um, greater depth of character, which is excellent. We are looking at a rapidly progressing story, but it's one where the pacing prevents us from necessarily getting the depth of story that we might like to see. And we get all these references and these comeback characters, but again, the limitations in terms of being able to see the full scope of that. Um, so it's this combination of great use of the tools available to you while simultaneously bringing to mind missed opportunities that a full season would have granted. And those are all things that I'm getting from these episodes here. So again, fun times, a few little heartstring pulls there, and quite a bit of dramatic development. I'm trying to think if there was anything else Easter egg wise that surprised me here. Oh, there was a little reference. We got to see a nod to the Once and Always Cranston Tech set. We got an acknowledgement of Zach and his hip hop keto. We again just hinting at these little things like what happened with Once and Always, and actually getting to see a Once and Always set is nice. I'm not certain if that Billy scene was literally filmed on set, or if they just green screened in some Once and Always footage. But it was still nice to see either way. And Cosmic Fury is just continuing to deliver strong stories that make you wish for more. And I think that might be while it is the biggest downside, I think, of these episodes, it is also, I think, a high compliment to the writers that they have you wishing for more, and they're inspiring wishes to see more. So very solid series so far. A little bit uneven just in terms of that, again, rapid fire pacing. But really has you wondering, okay, how's it all going to come together in the end? And I'm looking forward to checking that out with all of you next week. So thank you again for joining me. I hope that you've all had a wonderful week and that you all have a wonderful week ahead. I'm going to do whatever I can to try and really deliver with my series and the conclusion of my series with episodes 99 and 100 on the way. So 2 episodes left to watch for Cosmic Fury, and then that'll be the last 2 episodes of Power Rangers. And then there'll be 2 episodes left of Power Reviews. And then that'll be it. And it's really hard to believe that both these things that I've dedicated so much of my life to are really coming to an end after all this time. I don't know what the future may hold. I don't know what Power Rangers may become if it eventually returns. Um, and I don't know what I might choose to do if if I continue to make videos. Um, but yeah, we're at the end of an era here. End of the era for the franchise, end of an era for my channel. Um, so thank you again for joining me on all this. And before we go, let us not forget our remaining three equally non-controversial phrases. So, number one, love is love. Number two, say with me, chat, trans rights are human rights. And number three, say with me, chat, robots are cool. And sometimes they can shapeshift and run a circus alongside a sentient mushroom. Which of us haven't had that dream? So, thank you all again. I've got a long night editing ahead of me, and then hopefully some sleep, and a long weekend as well. So, have a great night. Have a happy Halloween. Have a safe Halloween. And until next time, farewell, Ranger fans, and let the power protect you.